The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
Siege, it's the morning after Canada versus Sweden, the first game at the Four Nations face-off. On TV, it looked amazing. At the Bell Center, what was it like?
What a spectacle. From starting that night off with Mario Lemieux bringing the roof down, to Canada getting a power play and scoring 12 seconds into their first power play with, you get a goal from McDavid to Crosby to McKinnon. It's a goal like that. It's not necessarily the way it went in, but that sort of score line is what you imagine when you imagine a tournament like this, right? What is it like to see McDavid, McKinnon, and Crosby on the ice together? Well, it took them 12 seconds to put the puck in the net. And then, good for Sweden. A rough first period, certainly barely generated any shots on net, and then fought back in the game and had tons of chances to win it. You get an overtime of 3-on-3 that lasts 6 minutes, 6 seconds. That is the very first 3-on-3 overtime in the history of time featuring NHL players that went longer than 5 minutes, because obviously that's the amount of time that it's clipped in the NHL. And so I think on all kinds of levels, no matter who would have scored the goal to end it, whether it was someone wearing the three crowns or Team Canada, I would have, talked to you hours later this morning and said, that's about as good as it gets to open this tournament. There were so many questions. Anyone listening to our pod knows we weren't asking those questions about what the quality of play would be, what the level of engagement from the players would be, even from the fans. The fans were part of the story in that game. Sidney Crosby has never played for the Montreal Canadiens, right? He's got his name chanted both when he's on the ice during overtime, before they announce him as the first star and player of the game. I'm not sure I've ever seen anything quite like that, to be honest. It was really a special night. And if you want to step back and say, what's this all about? This is why we have these tournaments. This is why we should be excited that there's a 2028 World Cup of hockey coming. And so, the Olympics is obviously the creme de la creme, but my goodness, what an appetizer.
Man, just watching the broadcasts and just hearing the Bell Center atmosphere, seeing the action, the gameplay, a lot of people who didn't want to care about this tournament or thought it was going to be a dud, I'd like to think maybe that one game might be enough for people to eat humble pie. Like there were a few people who I thought weren't going to give a damn about this tournament who were tapped in to that first game, and it delivered on virtually every front that you just mentioned, Siege. It was gripping. I don't know. I would hope for the sake of the tournament they continue that through to the end. But if you're looking for some kind of hook to draw people in who are on the fence, you might not get better than that game.
I agree. Especially because, look, it's 2-0 Canada pretty early. Sweden isn't generating any chances, as I mentioned. Like, if that becomes a 5-1 game, just to pick a random score, we're probably talking about this a little differently. I'd still tell you about Mario, and we talk about whichever players might have popped in that scenario. But, I think to have Sweden, fight back, have the chances they did in overtime. Philip Gustafsson made a save on Devon Taves, of all people, late in the game, though, that basically earned Sweden a point. Just an absolute game-saving stop. It had kind of all the elements you want in hockey. Look, there was certainly some hits and physical contact, and unfortunately that resulted in Shea Theodore, being done for the tournament for Canada. It maybe didn't have quite the animus you're looking for, but for a first game, I don't know what more you could ask for. I think, if you're in North America, one of our listeners there, you're telling me you're going to see that game. You're not going to watch Saturday night when Canada and the U.S. play, because I will make a prediction early on that one. That one is going to have more animus. That one has more players that are likely to mix it up. Wouldn't surprise me if Sam Bennett came into Canada's lineup after being scratched in the opener. Obviously, you have the Tkachuk brothers and others on the U.S. side. I think physicality will be part of the game plan in that game, at least in the early stages. To get in on the forecheck, finish checks the way, coaches instruct their teams in the playoffs. I think that one will feel maybe more like a playoff game, but this one had the elements you want to draw people in. The crowd was a sellout too. I don't know, because and to be fair, I reported even on TSN a month ago or so about some of the difficulty selling tickets. It's probably going to be a little harder. We're recording Thursday morning before USA and Finland play. In addition to those not being countries represented by the host nation here in Montreal, there's a massive snowstorm happening outside. So if it ends up and you're just at home and you're not engaged in this and you see a lot of empty seats, obviously that could be just not having the host country. But this is also a day it's hard to get around outside Montreal. We're talking like a foot of snow is coming, over the course of the day. So yeah. Anyway, I'm rambling in all directions, man. Like I'm still feeling kind of the frenetic energy from the building, and slam dunk, home run, amazing start to the tournament. And I'm just a little upset we've only got 6 games left.
The frenetic energy is exactly what I want for this, because the next person I want to bring up is Sidney Crosby. And getting the opportunity to play some kind of meaningful best on best tournament of some sort in Montreal, where he's revered the Canadians in his youth, that meant something to him. And for the last how many days, we discussed whether or not he'd be available. We figured he'd find a way to make himself available. And then he plays an incredible game. 3 assists. He gets the cheers from everybody. This is the oldest player at this tournament, and he was giving everybody the business. What was it like watching Sidney Crosby in that game?
Well, let me tell you a story. Canada had an optional skate before the Wednesday game, and Sidney Crosby was among the players that were out there, which, when you think of it in NHL terms, you're used to seeing maybe younger players lower down the lineup, scratches, take that skate, not always the stars. And afterwards, he was asked about that, and I think it was reasonable to wonder, hey, was he working on his injury, like still with handling the puck and those things? And he said, this is just a great place to skate. Like part of his reasoning for skating was just he wanted to have another lap or a few laps around the Bell Center in the morning. I mean, I don't think anyone is more. Sidney Crosby might be the oldest guy in the tournament, and he is, as you mentioned, but I'm not sure anyone's more invested in it, quite honestly. Even speaking with some of the folks around the Canadian team, like going back several months now, he has been dialed in on the details. He's been, having meetings all around the NHL circuit with players that were going to be on this team as his teammates, with Hockey Canada officials. Apparently his attention to detail is just off the charts with how he approaches this. And then you see the way he plays in game 1, well, with that injury, he ends up with 3 assists. I'm not sure. We might run out of superlatives at some point if you talk about Crosby. I mean, John Cooper said after the game that he's going to go down as the greatest player ever to play for his country. And he said, if not that, then he's going to be on the Mount Rushmore, maybe with the Marie-Philippe Poulins or whoever else you want to cite there. I don't think some people took that as like Cooper's, missing out on someone. I think really you should just take the spirit of what he's saying. The fact you're watching in real time someone who's in that kind of conversation, what a way for the tournament to begin. And do you know what else is like? I'm reminded of the passing of time being here, Julian, because Canada is literally filled with players. Like his teammates, literally, most of them grew up cheering for Sidney Crosby. Like Mitch Marner is by no means, I mean, he's an established NHL player, but he wasn't even a teenager yet when the golden goal was scored. And part of what he said after scoring the overtime winner is like, if you had told me that I would score a goal for Canada in overtime assisted by Sidney Crosby when I was 8 or 10 years old, like, wow. Right. And then you go down the list, like Seth Jarvis was an 8-year-old at his buddy's birthday party in Winnipeg when Crosby scored the golden goal. I mean, he's literally playing with players that grew up revering him, that helped, spark their own dreams. I mean, it's just such a special, unique thing. And the fact he's here and clearly able to, even in short bursts, like I don't know how long it's reason, but he's still playing at a level where there's no debate about his place on the team, right? There's no one coming out this morning going like, this is getting a little awkward. Like maybe Sidney needs to be playing a little lower in the lineup. I mean, he basically, when that game was 3-3 for the last half of the third period in overtime, John Cooper was going the Crosby line, which is Nathan McKinnon as the center. But so the McKinnon line, McDavid line, McKinnon line, McDavid line, like he rode the crap out of his top 6 in that moment. You can understand why. First of all, the point system incentivizes trying to win in regulation. You get 3 points for regulation wins. So Canada was chasing that, and Crosby was playing at that level. So, I mean, it's like at one time we're sort of having this conversation about who he is in history and all the sort of nice, warm, memory stuff. But in the real time, in the game with so many great players. In a game, so many of the players, Julian said afterwards, was the fastest game they've ever played in. You know, he's the one making a difference. He's the one, out there bending the puck in Canada's will. You know, backhand pass to McKinnon, wide open net to start the game. You know, instinctively holds onto the puck, keeps it, and gives it to Marner. On the overtime winner rather than turning over possession as teams don't want to do on 3-on-3 overtime. The Mark Stone goal. I mean, Stone makes two great plays on that too, shooting the puck through Gustafsson's leg, getting the play started up ice, but Crosby protects it. It's Gustav Forsling he's coming down on, right? I mean, that's a defenseman who won a Stanley Cup last year by neutralizing all the top players on the other teams, and Crosby's able to make a play and get the puck to Stone. I mean, I think that the offensive stuff will stand out wherever his point totals matters, but he means so much to the team too. I mean, he's not just it's not like a captain in a ceremonial way. Like I think he truly is the heart and soul of this team. The fact he cares too, like when we get back to like, what does this mean? We only saw the trophy for the first time a couple days ago. We don't even know what all this is. Well, Sidney Crosby tells you what it is with his level of preparation, how much he compares and competes, and how well he played in that opener.
You mentioned Mitch Marner. One of the fun things about these international tournaments is seeing fans from all these different NHL teams unite for their own country. And in Montreal in particular, where obviously it's Montreal Canadiens land, they put that aside to cheer for guys like Mitch Marner, who scores the overtime winner, and Brad Marchand, who plays for the Boston Bruins. That I thought was just really funny to observe.
Yeah, it is funny. And look, I think that this... as much, I'm going to ask everyone to put their snark aside or their cynicism aside for a moment and just put yourself in Mitch Marner's skates. He's been known, fairly or not, as a player who hasn't been able to deliver in the big moments. He's not alone, but obviously he's part of the important part of the Maple Leafs team that's gone 1-8 in playoff series during his time as an NHL player. And if you look at his own individual record, he's not scored a lot in those games. And, I don't know what this is going to, I don't know how much confidence this will give him. I'm not saying this will change it when it gets to this year's playoffs. It's hard to predict, but I think a moment like that, it mattered to him, man. I've been around Mitch. I've actually been to all of Mitch's playoff games, except for two that were played in the COVID year in Montreal, because at that point we still weren't traveling to games. I did go to game 6 of that series, but I've literally, however many playoff games he's played, I've been to all of them minus 2. And I've never seen him quite the way he was in that post game, just talking what it means, thinking about family, thinking about young Mitch. I mean, this is what this tournament is. It unites him with a Brad Marchand on a penalty kill. And as you're mentioning, they get that big kill in the last 10 minutes of the game. He's playing with Tampa Bay Lightning players, and they've obviously played in playoff series, or the Panthers guys. I think this is what makes international competition so compelling for NHL fans, honestly, is you get to see all these twists. I mean, Anthony Cirelli was out there on that PK blocking a Victor Hedman slap shot, end up glancing off his stick, but he was physically put himself in a position where if it went off his kneecap or his shin, he was ready to take it there. And, how many times has Anthony Cirelli watched Victor taking those one-timers from the point, thinking I'm glad I'm not on the other side, but all of a sudden he is. Mm-hmm. So, I think that was, I don't think how big that moment is for Mitch Marner can be overstated. Mario Lemieux, once upon a time, this is even before my time in a sense, I was on the earth, but I wasn't really paying close attention. In 1987 said that playing in that Canada Cup, playing with Gretzky, scoring the goals he did, having the moments he did, actually elevated his career. It gave him almost an extra level of belief of what he was. And no one doubted Mario Lemieux. You're talking about a first overall pick, a guy who scored on the first shift of his first game in the NHL, someone who had tremendous success. But it was in that environment with the absolute best of his peers where he found success, where something clicked for him in his career. And I wonder, I'm not just applying this to Mitch Marner. I mean, we still haven't seen Team USA play yet. There's all kinds of players in the tournament in the same situation as Marner, in that they haven't represented their country on this kind of level, and perhaps can either be propelled by a big tournament, a big moment, maybe just being part of a team that ultimately wins the trophy that they can take back and maybe be at a different level. And I think if you're a Leafs fan or a Mitch Marner fan or both, you have to feel optimistic that he's going to take something from this. It's just a different narrative. He's not counted on. He's playing a huge role for Canada here. He's on Connor McDavid's wing. He's on their power play too, and he's on their penalty kill. So, I mean, this guy, he played 21 minutes in the opener. Won't surprise me if he's among the top handful of forwards in ice time for Canada by the end of the tournament. But, it's got to feel good to know that you're at that level when you're looking around and again, I don't think that Mitch lacks for confidence, but things haven't always gone his way when he's been in the biggest moments of his career. And that would be one of the bigger games of his life. And he found a way to end it with, a shot just over the blocker, Philip Gustafsson at 6:06.
Yeah, what a shot from Marner. Okay, I need to move on to Shea Theodore. That was a tough scene for him. His tournament is over. What do we know about what Canada can do in that situation with one player in Shea Theodore not being available to them for the rest of this tournament? Can they replace him? What can they do?
This is why you're so good at what you do, Julian, because it's the segue of like how great it can be for a player like Marner, and then this is the absolute worst it could be, right? Shea Theodore plays 6 minutes in one game, comes a long way from Vegas as a member of the Cold Knights, couple practices with Canada, gets excited, and unfortunately suffers the injury he did and is immediately ruled out for the tournament. You've got to feel for him. And we should highlight here too, with Canada having already lost Alex Pietrangelo. I mean, that was going to be their second pairing at this tournament. And so they're now down not only two players with a lot of familiarity that play together in Vegas, they're down basically their third and fourth defenseman in terms of what the management and coaching staff were looking at coming in. What they can do right now is they're still working through this on some level. I was told pretty recently here that the NHL has informed Hockey Canada they can basically tell another defenseman, hey, you're the next man up. Let's assume, and I don't know who that defenseman is. As of this time we're recording, Hockey Canada doesn't yet know who that defenseman is. Like they're working through the process. But let's assume that player is probably somewhere on vacation. I can imagine he's not here in Montreal, even if he's a Quebecer, because there's a foot of snow outside, and this is a rare break in the NHL season. So basically, Canada can inform another player, another defenseman, that he would be the next up if in case of injury. It does sound like, and I didn't realize this earlier, if they have another defenseman go down with injury, they can bring that player in. And so it doesn't mean they necessarily have to go with 13 forwards, 5D. And so if you're that player, A, you're probably on vacation. B, you might be thinking about trying to get some skates in for conditioning just in case, because not everyone is necessarily doing that at that moment. But it's a tough situation for the Canadian team. They have to play with Sanheim and Doughty. Essentially, will be what I assume their third pairing is, and they have to go with what they got on the ice, and they can't even bring someone in to practice as an extra. That's probably the key here. Is the next man up? We'll call him for now because I don't have the identity of the player. He can't fly in and participate and be even a shadow member of the team, which would be helpful, right? Because at least if you're flying in, you get to meet some guys if you don't know them. You're in the meetings. You're getting the ice time reps. And even if you do that knowing, hey, I might not even play, I think that's would be a little easier spot to if you have someone doing that, to throw that player into a game. Canada doesn't have that luxury. And as I mentioned, I think Saturday's game against the U.S. is going to be very physical, and especially players getting in on the forecheck, hitting defensemen. Obviously, there's all kinds of ways players get injured. It's not just through clean body checks like the one Shea Theodore took from Kempe. But it's not a great situation for the Canadian team, but they have to forge on. I mean, look, no one is feeling too bad for Finland, and they lost 3 defensemen before this tournament even started. I mean, this is just the reality. And unfortunately for Theodore, his tournament ends pretty abruptly. John Cooper mentioned, I should note that after Marner's overtime goal, though, like he was the first guy in the tunnel congratulating his teammates. And so whatever personal disappointment he felt, he was still showing up for his guys after that big win.
So we move to USA Finland, which is coming later tonight on Thursday. We mentioned the snow that's happening in Montreal right now. And hey, maybe that affects
Shout out to my Uber driver, man. I'm in Brossard right now, which is not in Montreal, downtown Montreal where I'm staying. And I trusted my life in my Uber app, and I had an excellent driver on my way out here.
I'm telling you this, man. I am not hitting these roads at all as best as I can. I'm at least waiting for it to taper off. I don't even know. I think it's gonna keep going until like sometime in the evening. Like, this is an all day thing. We are getting a bunch of snow in Montreal.
This is hockey
it's
weather. It has been cold AF here. I mean, especially for anyone who doesn't live here. And then you're getting a dump of snow. I mean, but you know what? I think it's perfect for this event. This is also, we haven't even got to the World Cup yet, and I'm sure it's on the list. But this is also why these tournaments should be in season. I mean, the players are in better shape, but I just think it feels like hockey weather feels, it sets the right atmosphere for making this a successful, fun event.
Okay, since we mentioned World Cup 2028, I did want to ask about USA Finland. But can you at least kind of shine a light on World Cup 2028 and the announcement made yesterday?
Well, I'm not going to hide my bias here. I'm thirsting for international competition. I'm not cynical about the event I'm covering right now, and I think it's great. And what this World Cup does is it guarantees, or I guess it doesn't. There's always we've all been through this before enough that I shouldn't say guarantees, because until it's done, it's not done. But it really firmly puts on the schedule now a regular rotation of sports. And Ron Hainsey, who's the assistant executive director to Marty Walsh, he had the, really a really interesting point as they announced this officially on Wednesday night. And that he said, look, we look at soccer's World Cup, and he's like, we know we're not soccer. We're not going to be a global game like that. But there's no reason they can't be some reasonable facsimile of that they can't, over a long period of time. I'm not saying that in 2028, everyone's going to be like, wow, this compares to, what one of the absolute premier sporting events in the world, in any sport, anywhere. But, they want to give the players, even a chance just to have the Mitch Marner moments. I mean, there can only be so many iconic Sidney Crosby golden goal moments. I mean, that literally might be, I was going to go somewhere morbid and say that he scored that goal might be in the first line of his obituary one day. But it's the truth. I'm just saying that's the significance of the achievement is that the whole country of people, really beyond the country, remembered one goal for so long because it meant so much in that moment. I mean, you want to create these events where that's at least possible. You don't get one every tournament. It's not to say that everything will be, those kind of highlights, but you want to create the circumstances where they can happen, right? And that's what Ron Hainsey was saying. And so you're going to have the Olympics next February, a 2028 World Cup also in February in season. I think that's significant. The league is, and I should say on that World Cup, Julian, it sounds like the plan right now is to play games in Europe and in North America during the World Cup, which I think is cool, right? If you're, and they haven't identified the cities, but if you're a Swedish player, that means you might play a World Cup game in Stockholm, or a Finnish player in Helsinki, and not only play in front of your own fans on your own home soil with more of your family and friends, not just the ones who could fly across the ocean in attendance. And it's going to be some sort of hybrid like we saw, back in the 2004 World Cup, if you might remember that. And so, the league's going to shut down its schedule for a meaningful amount of time to allow this to happen. This is a priority, though, again. And we have a situation where the owners and players in this league are working together. And I think everyone does recognize on a certain level, like this, it's hard to argue this isn't good for the game. What will be best for the game probably over a long period of time is if that World Cup includes even a little qualifying tournament and you give an opportunity because Gary Bettman's saying it will be at least 8 teams. Well, we can name right now 5 of them that will be there, like 100% for sure. You're going to have Canada, US, Sweden, Finland, and Czechia. I think it's very likely Switzerland would be on that list, Slovakia, Germany. I'm just looking at the next tier of countries, how you determine that. And then, of course, we have the big Russia question, which we can't answer today. I don't even think there's any reason to dive deep into it. I think everyone understands, look, they're not eligible to play in international competition. We don't know what's going to look like in 3 years' time. Hopefully for reasons that have nothing to do with hockey, the war in Ukraine at that point is long over. And there might be some conditions in the world that at least allows that to be a conversation. It's not a conversation today. But, ideally you have it so there can be at least a qualifying tournament for some of the smaller nations have a chance to get in. Maybe Slovenia. I mean, Anze Kopitar, unfortunately, probably is going to be aged out by this point in time. But, I'm thinking of Denmark. Some of the countries that are in the next tier that wouldn't be guaranteed certainly an invite for an 8-team tournament, but can maybe fight their way in. And look, I will be the first to admit, it's not always perfect. You let in one of these other teams that it's a little lower down in the hockey world, you might get a 7-1 game in the round robin, and you kind of got to live with that. And, it's not perfect, but I think how else do you grow the sport is you want those countries to be buoyed by just qualifying for the tournament. As a Canadian, I know it was pretty darn exciting when Canada sent a men's soccer team to Qatar for the World Cup. And Canada didn't have a lot of success in those individual games, but even getting to that level was a sign, a bigger sign of some of the strides the country's taken. I think the same thing can exist in hockey. And so, that's the goal. The goal here, Julian, is to have Olympics 26, World Cup 28, Olympics 30, World Cup 32. Maybe at some point in time, there'll be other events. I think the goal, I should state too, this is a clear sign that this Four Nations face-off, at least right now, looks like it's most likely a one-off. This is a one-time event where it made sense to on some level, if they were going to do any international competition, this is what they could do on relatively short planning notice. But over time, more international hockey, I think that the storylines flow from one to another. It gives players an opportunity to do something they don't want to do. And then, somewhere down the road, I don't know when it will be, but somewhere down the road, these will probably be bigger money makers too, that generate revenue for the players and the owners, which at the end of the day, it is a business. But I think what makes these events special, I should mention this, Bill Daly kind of went in a little bit on how the finances are working for this specific tournament, Julian. And he mentioned that basically the money players are being paid as an appearance fee and what the winning team will split. They didn't give exact figures to the media at that time, but he said it pales in comparison to what these guys are used to making. He said the players are here because they want to play for their countries ultimately, and they're getting a small financial reward to do so. But, I think that's what makes this fun for a lot of them. It's for love of country. It connects them on some level. No one's here because it's their job, and that's pretty special.
So what are you looking forward to for USA Finland? There's the other game we'll get to really quickly, but what are you looking forward to the other two teams playing at this tournament tonight?
Well, Finland's overmatched, right? Like there's no way around that. They have a player, Nicholas Bantapalo, who we talked a little bit about the last episode, but he's hasn't even played a half season in the NHL. And so that's a little different than when we're talking about somehow Canada's got to work in Travis Sanheim, who's one of the NHL ice time leaders this season. He was their 7th D in the first game. Rasmus Andersson was Sweden's, scratch as a defenseman in the first game. I mean, we're talking about different quality of depth here. But the one thing I would caution you, what I'm looking forward to and what I'm interested about is we've all seen this from Finland. Like, man, I think people forget about it. Like I've seen so many jokes sort of like on social media about Finland's chances here. Like Finland always it's the we more than the me. Like it's a team that constantly outkicks its coverage. I expect them to be a tough game. It's not a prediction on the outcome, but I'm just curious to see what kind of fight they can put up, not just in the USA game, but as they go through this event. Obviously a proud, successful hockey nation, and they're still throwing guys like Alexander Barkov over the boards. This isn't, they have elite players still on their roster. They just don't probably have as many as some of the other teams are going up against. But I think that they're being slept on a little bit from a public perception. I'm not saying the U.S. is. I think the U.S. there's enough U.S. players that have been to World Championships or played at the under 18 Worlds or the World Juniors that they would know that you can't take anything for granted against a country like Finland. But to me, I'm interested in watching that. I'm interested in watching the U.S. kind of start this tournament on enemy ice. Like Austin Matthews got lustily booed when he was introduced before the Canada-Sweden game. I think it's great. I think if people aren't booing you, like what this is shows they care, right? In a roundabout way. But the U.S., I don't know what the atmosphere will be like because of the snowstorm, but they're going to be definitely in hostile territory for the Finland game and the Canada game Saturday. But then it flips, and on Monday night, they're the home team, and they have a chance to potentially play in the championship for the Four Nations on home ice in Boston. So they're going to see some parallels. I'm just curious how they react to that, and where they go, because let's not get too carried away here. They're still considered by many to be the favorites of this tournament, the deepest team. They got Connor Hellebuck, who's going to have a couple of Vezinas by the time his career's over, maybe a couple more than what he's already got. And he's in net for them. They've got stacked players up and down the lineup. Dylan Larkin on a fourth line tells you that you're pretty darn good on the three lines above them. And so, how does Team USA handle the crown that's being given to them, even though, obviously they haven't won anything yet. They're certainly coming here with a level of expectation most American teams haven't dealt with in the past.
One more thing before we get to stick taps. Saturday is going to be so fun. Finland versus Sweden. We know about the rivalry between those two nations. And then Canada versus USA. Like, this is not even a real question. I'm just excited for you that you'll be in the building for both of those games. It's going to be amazing.
Yeah, I don't even need to sleep between then and now, and I've barely had any sleep with the quick turnaround late game last night. But I mean, that's going to be a sugar rush. It's going to be awesome. I mean, to see those games in the same arena, one after another, like it's a special opportunity. I can't wait for Saturday. It's a super Saturday. It obviously is the marquee moment of this tournament. Frankly, I mean, organizers are hoping you get a marquee moment in the final, but this is the one that's guaranteed to you by having those rivalry games. And if Wednesday was any indication, I just think the fans that have traveled to Montreal, the fans that are already in Montreal are going to show up and make that, probably a set of games that I remember, no matter who wins and no matter how they go down.
Do you have a prediction for Canada, USA?
No, I need to see the American team first. I mean, my prediction I've sort of been hinting at here is I predict it will be a North American style physical game. I think that'll be part of what the coaches and the players are really trying to do. But beyond that, it's like, I can't give you a score or a team. I want to see, the identity of that U.S. team. It's going to be a cleaner game too, right? Like it's Canada, it's both teams' second chance to play as a team. I expect that the quality was good in the first game. Don't get me wrong, but I expect it to even pick up as we get through this tournament.
Do you have a stick tap before we go?
Yeah, I'll take the low hanging fruit. I'm going to stick tap Shea Theodore because just a shitty set of circumstances he finds himself in. He was so pumped. I was part of the media speaking with him there the other day at his pod, and difficult to leave the tournament with an injury to be knocked out so early in it. But stick tap to him, which it's really more, a reflection that this didn't go ideally for him, but hope that his recovery goes well and that we see him back, at least if not before the playoffs, during the playoffs, because he's got a chance to win a Stanley Cup still this year in Vegas.
I'll give my stick tap to number 87 for being the man of the moment during Wednesday night's game. I think that's also pretty low-hanging fruit as well, but very well deserved, obviously, after that performance. And honorable mentions to Mitch Marner and the crowd at the Bell Center as well. Yeah. Amazing.
I was going to stick tap whoever put together the pregame ceremony too, but I thought that's almost a trope at this point. I mean, everyone celebrates the Bell Center presentation so much, but that was a legit crazy reception that Lemieux got. That was awesome.
CJ, continue your great work covering this tournament. Everyone listening or watching, thank you. Get your questions in right now for the next Ask CJ, and we'll be back next week. Thanks so much for listening.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.